Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca Isabel wash processed Bolivia from Wes Ngopi. There's the bag right there. And Wes Ngopi, based out of Shah, Malaysia. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel. This is a coffee roaster I had a very limited familiarity with going into this review. This is also our first ever review of any Malaysian-based coffee roaster, and that very limited familiarity I'm referencing is when we received a sample of one of Wes Ngopi's Kenyan coffees from Airworks Coffee, and that coffee caught my interest because of the roast profile. So we worked with Airworks Coffee on obtaining this Bolivian coffee, as this one very much sounds like my type of coffee. So a massive shout out to and thank you to Airworks for the assistance, and we'll see how this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 43. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a slightly toned down recipe in a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 94 degrees Celsius, about 201 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind. However, on this one we went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, the roasting machine that they use for this coffee, since this is our first time reviewing this coffee roaster, they used a THCR3 for this one, but it sounds like they have since transitioned into a new roasting machine. So that's what should have been utilized for this one, but I'm not entirely sure what their new roasting machine is as of the time of recording. The roast profile on this coffee, though, as alluded to at the start of this video, it's different because of just how light it is, as I would say that this is on par with some of the lightest roasting coffee roasters we've had anywhere in the world, and I would say that at times is reminiscent of some of the Mood Trap coffees that we've had in the past, which is to say that this is an extremely light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 16, first impression, and we opted for the V60 with an initially tame brew offering some subtle tea-like experiences, but the cup does open up to a point of depth, with it mostly focusing on a floral sense in line with the listed jasmine, as well as it increasing in sweetness at near room temperatures with some more of the fresh fruit aspects. So this first impression kind of led me to believing that this one needed significantly more rest, as this cup was perhaps a little bit more tame than I was initially expecting, though I probably should have expected that given just how light this coffee was. Well, we move on to day 20 as we opted for the Chemex, and it was not quite as impressive on this day as it continued to focus on the tea-like aspects, with plenty of the listed jasmine and lemon zest being the most pronounced attributes, a little less sweetness and a little bit more subtlety, so not necessarily trending in the right direction, but at the same time I still felt like this coffee probably needed more extended rest. On day 24, we ran it to the April brewer, and this cup was extremely Gesher-like, offering plenty of these soft citric aspects with some floral tones as well, but just enough sweetness and intensity to give it some depth as it continues to open up on the cool down, offering more of those subtle jasmine-like and citric zest aspects with a complementary stone fruit sense to it now. So this one was a little better as I was getting a little bit more depth to it, but once again I saw a little bit of a theme to it. Off brew, it's a little bit too subtle, and then the more it cools down, the more you're experiencing from the cup, which is pretty much in line with a lot of these coffees in general. Day 28 through the V60 with Wes Ngopi's recipe, and the cup continues to remain on the more subtle and soft side of things, with more of the consistent clean tea, floral, and citric qualities to it. We are working with a geisha. Even if it is a Bolivian geisha, plenty of those attributes are still very much present within this one. The best continues to come after a lengthy cool down all the way down to room temperature, with more of the peachy qualities as well as sweetness coming through at that time. And I believe they have something along the lines of a lemon custard, and I could definitely feel that a lot more in terms of the sweetness as the cup did cool down. Day 31 through the Chemex with Wes Ngopi's recipe, and a slightly more fine grind, as this is by far the best the cup has been to this point, as there's notably more intensity. And that's what I continued to want to get from this coffee, was just more intensity, given how subtle and tame and delicate it had been up to this point. Notably more intensity in terms of the peachy and sweeter aspects, softer berry and citric qualities also present, while the strong florality is very much present with the light-bodied cup. Much better this time around. And we move on to day 34 as we opted for the V60 with a more fine grind as well. And it's improved, and I couldn't help but feel that I really needed to grind this one a lot more fine. It didn't really matter as much on the temperatures, which is something we'll go into a little later. But as far as the fineness of this coffee, I definitely feel like it needed to be really tightened up, getting a little bit more out of this coffee. In addition to that, it does offer that grainy geisha quality, skewing much more in the floral sense with a little bit more of the creaminess in line with the listed lemon custard. So yeah, it's definitely on there, and it's definitely present on this day. Day 37, through the Chemex with a significantly more fine grind. So actually I should say that while we went a little bit more fine on the grind, we actually went a fair bit more fine on this grind as well, as it continues to remain extremely delicate with much more of the jasmine tea forward aspects. Again, tea-like with a number of citric qualities, but it does open up after a lengthy and extended cool down. So a lot of the notes in this one have been extremely consistent, but it is a deep coffee once you do let it cool down. But that's been a little bit of an interesting theme, as usually coffee has much more of an experience off brew than kind of in the intermediary all the way up to the point where it gets that cool down. But this coffee right off brew in the intermediary, it's pretty consistent. And then once it does cool down, that's when it really seems to skyrocket in the overall depth and intensity of it. Day 40, final notes we have, and it felt like we finally hit the mark of this coffee. So it could have been a number of factors. It could have been all the adjustments we made or the time we gave it, because at this point I was starting to feel a lot more of the intensity of this coffee. Better defined peachiness and citric tones to the cup. Still a jasmine tea forward aspect to it, but there was significantly more sweetness and intensity, including the listed lychee aspect to the berry component to it as well. So I'm feeling a lot more definition and intensity to the overall qualities within this one. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And one level 5. So let's go through that one real quick. And it is the cleanliness level 5. When initially making this tasting wheel, I played back and forth with the idea of leaving it there at that level 4, mostly because a lot of the aspects in this one didn't necessarily have the most definition, a lot of the definition that I usually hope for and expect from geisha coffees in general. Though towards the end, I was thinking to myself that it's mostly because the base is so clean and tame that a lot of the aspects within this one, while they may not necessarily be overly intense or pronounced, are still, I would say, relatively well defined for what this coffee is in general. So at the end of the day, I said, okay, lower side of level 5, but I'm still going to be generous and give it that level 5 mark. And full level 4s, we'll start with the finish level 4. And for me, the finish is one of the better aspects of this coffee, mostly because it really takes all the way to the coffee cooling down to really experience a lot more of those aspects. But the finish is very beautiful, and that's usually why I like geisha coffees as much as I do, because it offers a subtle yet very clean and elegant feel to it. And while the jasmine tea aspect and the citric aspects are very much present at the forefront of this coffee, towards the end, when you are experiencing that more peachy quality in the cool down and finish, it makes it much more enjoyable and worth maybe a little bit of a tame initial impression of this coffee. Sweetness, level 4. For the longest time, I did not think that this coffee was ever going to reach that level 4 for the sweetness, mostly because of just how delicate this was. But so many adjustments and maybe a little bit more time. And honestly, I feel like this coffee probably still needs more time. I mean, we're talking about Mood Trap, which recommends 45 days, or Apollon's Gold recommends 45 days. A lot of these extremely light roasting coffee roasters recommend such an extended period of rest to get the best out of this one. And this one's still not even at that 45-day mark. So I definitely feel like the best is yet to come on this one. But the sweetness was something that I was very concerned about for the longest time. But towards the end, I said, okay, a lot of tinkering and adjustments really seems to bring out much more of the sweetness. And yes, it's a little bit more in that vanilla-like sense, a little bit more in that peach-like sense. So at the end, I justified that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. Don't think there's too much to discuss on that. As mentioned, there's a very well-defined jasmine-like aspect to it. A little bit more reminiscent of jasmine tea for me. Nonetheless, definitely pretty well pronounced within this one for the entirety of it. First note felt, and then in the much warmer temperatures, it's definitely very prominent as well. Berry fruit, level 4. Mentioned there's a little bit of that soft berry aspect, so lychee is a note that they have listed on here. Can definitely see that. It does come in a subtle yet sweet sense as well, so I'm very happy with that note on here. Citrus fruit, level 4. And as mentioned, right off brew and in the intermediary, this coupled with the jasmine are the most pronounced aspects within this one. So lemon zest makes a lot of sense. Lemon custard also makes a lot of sense. At the end, it does come out a little bit more in a sweeter sense, so happy with that being there at that level 4. Stone fruit, level 4. Another thing I was very concerned would never actually reach that level 4 mark, mostly because I was curious just where the peachiness was supposed to be in this coffee, but a lot of tinkering and adjustments finally made the peachiness a little bit more consistent, and I would say that I was very happy with it. Honestly, the main reason why I opted to lower the temperatures by the end was mostly because this coffee was best as it was cooler. So I said, why don't we just keep the temperatures cooler and see what happens? And that seemed to help, even while keeping the grind a little bit more fine on this one as well. Then the savoriness at a level 3. We'll move on to level 3s. Savoriness, level 3, that's definitely the tea-like aspect of this one. I could definitely see it being a little bit more of a black tea-like aspect to it. And then the acidity, level 3, not necessarily the brightest coffee, even with it being as light profiled as it is. That can be the case with some coffees that we've reviewed that have been extremely light. I'm thinking of some Picky Chemist coffees in the past as well. So that works well for me, as it's not necessarily the most important factor within this coffee. Final thing worth discussing is the body at a level 1, and this, of course, being a geisha coffee. I wondered if maybe the origin would be a little bit at play within this one, as Bolivian coffees might have a little bit more body to it. But once again, I feel like the varietal had a little bit more of an impact on it, as this is a very delicate and light-bodied cup, very tea-like in that regard. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's actually mixed, but in a good way. And the reason I say that is because I went into this coffee fully expecting that this is going to be a nailed-on top 10 coffee of the year contender for me, just because of what this coffee is. I love Bolivian coffees, I love geishas, and I love them all being in lighter profiles as well. So for all of those reasons, I fully expected this one to come out as one of my favorite coffees from the entire year, especially given that the descriptors of this coffee very much sounded in line with my own preferences. But obviously, I struggled with this one a little bit towards, we'll say, the beginning, and then by the end, I feel like I had a pretty good idea of what this coffee was, and I feel like if I had the same experience from these last 2 times trying it and this cup today that I had with the entirety of the time drinking this coffee, then this one easily would have been one of my top 10 favorite coffees of the entire year. But it's hard to justify that when only a handful of the cups that I had from this one were really up to that level and standard. So I feel like the way I messed this coffee up was maybe not giving it the proper rest time and adjustments that it needed right from the start, because when you get this coffee at its very best, it is easily one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. But once again, it was just a struggle to get to that point. So it kind of leaves it ambiguous. As of right now, it's my favorite Bolivian coffee. It's one of my favorite coffees that are of the non-common origins, not a Panamanian, not an Ethiopian, not an Ecuadorian coffee. So a lot of really positive things to say about this one. And while I'm on the note of this one, this coffee roaster has actually released some very enjoyable coffees. That one that Airworks released, that slow shade natural processed Ethiopian coffee, I found that one to be an absolutely beautiful coffee. And if we'd reviewed it, that one would have been my favorite natural processed coffee this year. So a little bit unfortunate in that regard. That Kenyan coffee was also interesting. So this coffee roaster is very interesting to me, and I do hope to try some more of their coffees in the future. And I have a little bit of this one left, so it might go into our freezer, mostly because I'm still curious what more we can get from this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you do enjoy your extremely light profiled coffees, then let's start with this one. It still offers tremendous clarity as well. So obviously we're thinking a geisha quality, and this one has so many of those geisha qualities. So of course the clarity, the florality, and then a softer citric profile to it. It has all of those things in very notable abundance, but at the same time, it does have some really nice depth, most notably the peachiness. And when I'm getting that peachiness from geisha coffees, then I really enjoy them as well. Definitely keep in mind the lighter profile of this one, as it probably does still need a little bit more extended rest. But I feel like if you're able to get this one at its best, then it's very much worth it, and it's a very enjoyable coffee. For the most part, I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Finca Isabel, wash processed Bolivia from Wes Ngopi. Thank you for watching.